to the United States House and Senate members, to the CIA, FBI, SEC, Homeland Security, the Justice Department, and local and state law enforcement. He serves as Senior Fellow for the Center for Security Policy and the American Center for Democracy and Economic Warfare Institute. I would ask you to please give Mr. Freeman your good, close attention. Be ready to submit questions on the cards that are on your table toward the end. And please turn off your cell phones so that we can give Mr. Freeman our attention. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I hope you do get Frank Gaffney. He's a good friend of mine. When they mention the Center for Security Policy, I'm a senior fellow. That's Frank's organization, and he has some chilling information on the Muslim Brotherhood. And another good friend is Congressman Louis Gohmert, who's been doing tremendous work. There are only a handful of Congress that there was the mention that I've spoken with senators and congressmen. And you know, it is obvious that there are some who are working for an agenda that is not the American agenda, and there are some who are working for we the people. And Congressman Gohmert, fortunately, is among those few, the proud, that are working for we the people. Now, what I'm going to share with you is another problem. I mean, we heard the problems about education and the problems about roads and what they're doing with their tax dollars, and I'm going to share that with you, and I'm going to interrupt with 2 commercials during my presentation. So I'm just warning you ahead of time, I'm going to give you 2 commercials. I have books for sale. They're available for $20. I'll sign them. I paid $17.91 for them each. So I'm making a whopping $2.09, which I will promptly turn back to your group. Any profit. I'm not here for profit. I'll pay my own way here. I'll pay my own way home. I'm selling books at my cost. And the reason is I think this message is that important. And more importantly than that, I want the permission to give you the 2 commercials. So I just want to get you ready for those. And by the way, I do have magazines. There's a couple of magazines back there. There's just a handful of copies, but they're free if you want to copy these magazines from the counter-terrorists. This one has a cover story on Vladimir Putin, and then this one has the picture of President Obama on the cover, but the story I wrote in this one is on non-state economic warfare, which is really about George Soros. I'm going to flip through these fairly quickly. My time is I need to stop at 1 o'clock so y'all can get back to your lives. Is that about right? So I've got about 40 minutes. It's really about an hour presentation, so I'm going to cut it, flip through a couple of things. I'd be happy to answer any questions, whatever questions you might have afterwards, either on the cards or if you want to ask afterwards. Be happy to answer what I didn't cover. But I'm just going to walk through this. Whether you realize it or not, we're in a global economic war. I mean, there's a lot of battles that we're fighting. One of them is the battle over the economy. When I'm talking about a global economic war, I mean real enemies of the United States that are coming to attack our economy. China, Russia, Venezuela, whomever, the Islamic global caliphate planners. Most people in Washington don't get this. I think you probably get it, because you can believe the 3 assumptions. Number 1, you believe there are enemies of the United States of America. Okay. Do you think our enemies want to go against our military, or do you think they would rather use some subversive means? And number 3, do we have vulnerabilities in our system? Right. I was at the Defense Intelligence Agency earlier this week in a symposium forum discussing these points, and people came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you for giving us a fresh viewpoint." I would have hoped that this was understood. Let me tell you some of the things that they found maybe were a fresh viewpoint. What we consider to be a global marketplace, our enemies consider to be a battle space. What happened was, under President Clinton, remember he ran for office and he said, "Is the economy stupid?" He took the National Security Council and he took the economic portion out of it and created the National Economic Council. And the thinking of economists and national security professionals broke at that point. They went different directions. Under FDR, we had a Bureau of Economic Warfare. We thought of them as one and the same. We realized that we were competing globally in a battle space. But after NAFTA and Clinton and all of that, we began to think, oh, no, free market everywhere. Everybody believes in the American way and the American system. And so we're just going to let the free market operate as much as we can internationally and national security will be all about forming weapons and getting weapon systems. And we went different paths. We went differently than the Chinese. In 1999, two senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army wrote a book titled Unrestricted Warfare. And their challenge was, basically, if we ever were to engage a superpower, exactly how would we go about that? Because they noticed at the time our military was the strongest on the planet. They noticed at the time our economy was the strongest on the planet. They noticed we were winning in every respect and we were bringing people along the path of freedom. And they said, if we had to challenge America, how would you do it? And basically what they said is, we don't want to take on America directly. A full frontal assault would be suicide. Our military was much larger, our spending was much greater, our technology was much better, and they knew that we would win a direct confrontation. So they said the way to beat America is you hit her in the wallet. You make America worry about its finances and its economy, and it'll stop worrying about national security and other matters. So here's the game plan. I'll just read it to you. It says, if the attacking side. Now, I'm not saying the Chinese have done this. I'm not saying they will do this. I'm saying what their military doctrine said. If the attacking side musters, first, a large amount of capital. At the time this was written, the Chinese had about $100 billion of foreign currency reserves. They have $3.4 trillion of foreign currency reserves today. You think they've mustered a large amount of capital? Okay. If they muster a large amount of capital, launch a sneak attack against financial markets, and I'll describe what that means in my presentation. Number 3, buries a computer virus and hacker detachment. You think that the Chinese have hacked any of our systems? Everything. And number 4, carry out a network attack. And number 4, ultimately the goal would be to cause the enemy nation to fall into social panic, street riots, and political crisis. They said financial warfare, new type of warfare, will be the main kind of warfare fought in the 21st century, and it won't be based on anything a military strategist has done. It won't be based on a statesman. It will be based on the techniques of George Soros. Now, in 1999, I would hazard to guess only a few of you knew who George Soros was. Many of you have learned of George Soros from Glenn Beck's exposures and other things. George Soros, I studied because I'm in the investment business, and he made a lot of money investing, destroying currencies like the British pound and the Malaysian ringgit and so forth. Just a huge fortune. So I studied him intimately to see what he did. The Chinese studied him also. They labeled him a financial terrorist. They mentioned him in the book Unrestricted Warfare 19 times, second only to the mention of Osama bin Laden, and they mentioned the two of them together 9 times. Here's what they said. They said, as we see it, a single man-made stock market crash, a single computer virus invasion, or manipulating enemy countries' exchange rates, these are the new kinds of weapons that we use in financial warfare. Think about that. Do you ever think of a stock market crash as man-made? The Chinese do. And then in February of 2011, in the magazine, it's Chesha magazine, I wanted to pronounce it Quishi, and I got corrected. Looks like Quishi, doesn't it? Q-U-I-S-H-I. In that magazine, the senior, which is an official publication of the Communist Party, they wrote an article that said, if we're going to fight the U.S., we have to fight the U.S. with key weapons. The Bible says that the borrower is a slave to the lender. What do we have as a weapon, the Chinese asked, that we can use? Well, we've got all this American debt. We could dump that on the markets. Would that hurt America? Sure it would. Or we could just stop buying it for a period of time. And that would cause deep economic crisis for Washington. And they wouldn't even blame us. What they would do is they'd blame themselves. And they're right. This was a Chinese official publication. And the Chinese aren't alone in recognizing this. This is the cover story. This is the magazine I told you I had over there. Russia, China, and the New Global Democratic Peace. Vladimir Putin basically said, hey, we should get all of these nations together and replace the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world. That's his big push. That's economic warfare. And this is based on KGB doctrine that was released by Jan Sejny. Jan Sejny is the number 2 person. He was number 2 in the Czechoslovakian Communist Party. He was the second highest ranking Soviet defector in history. He wrote a book, We Will Bury You. And in that book he said, basically, we know we're losing on the communist side. They know they're losing. So what they plan to do is enter an era of global democratic peace. And they're going to come up with some way that they start doing trade with Europe and the United States, and we say we're all capitalists now, basically. And we're all going to be trading free in the market. And when we do that, we're going to sneak up behind them, and we're going to use external economic weapons. And when we use those weapons, America will panic, and they'll rush in and vote in the progressive candidate who will move America towards socialism. Does that sound familiar at all? Think an economic panic would cause us to elect a socialist? Oh my goodness, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, in 1998, a professor, a Russian professor who was formerly in the KGB, very close friends with Vladimir Putin, in fact, one of his best friends, best favorite university professor, he got at a conference in Linz, Austria, 400 people in 1998. And he had an amazing theory. He said, I think the United States of America will collapse by the year 2010. Wow. Where did that come from? You remember back to 1998? We're number one, right? The internet's booming, the economy's booming, the military's the strongest in the world. We hadn't had 9/11. We're winning in every front. And he gets up and people are shocked. He said, how's that going to happen? He said, U.S. foreign debt is a pyramid scheme that's going to collapse. And it's going to be painful, but if Russia and China work together to collapse the U.S. debt as a pyramid scheme, if Russia and China work together, we can replace the dollar. And if we replace the dollar, we'll emerge stronger and we'll control the world going forward. That was his prediction. How do I know this? This was published in the Wall Street Journal. So what happened in the year 2008, 10 years later, according to the Treasury Secretary of the United States, I don't know if you've seen this, the Treasury Secretary is attending the Olympics in Beijing, and Chinese officials quietly come up to him and said, by the way, Mr. Secretary, I just want you to know the Russians have come to us and asked us to dump all of our holdings of American debt. And we're your good friends, we decided not to. But the Russians did. They dumped $65 billion worth of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac debt that they held in the summer of 2008. Right as the market was collapsing, right as we were having all these massive economic problems, they dumped. Had the Chinese dumped, it would have been about $500 or $600 billion on top of that. I tell you, that would have caused some serious problems. If they stopped buying, these are economic weapons. The Chinese said they were economic weapons, and the Russians used it and tried to get China to use it against us in the year 2008. Now, they're not alone. Here's another famous guy, Osama bin Laden. When he gave his speech at 9/11, he said, you know why we hit the World Trade Center? The answer is, it was a symbol of American economic might. We've got to hit the U.S. economy however we can, because if we hit the American economy hard enough, they'll pull out of the Middle East. And I'll give you one word that proves he was right. Sequestration. When our economy gets difficult, we start cutting our military, we start doing all kinds of things because we panic. And he's not alone. This guy right there, you see Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. You probably heard on Fox News today, Sean Hannity saying it over and over. He said, your kids can't get into the White House, but this supporter of terrorists has gotten into the White House. He's number 2 in an organization to the Muslim Brotherhood's senior-most scholar, a man who's not even allowed to set foot in the United States, Qaradawi, who says basically capitalism's got to fail. And when it fails, the good news is Sharia-compliant finance. Sharia will take over the world. And in fact, when we had the collapse in 2008, a lot of sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East said, we're not loaning you money anymore until your banks start offering Sharia-compliant finance loans. And look, check your bank. Call them up and ask if they offer Sharia finance loans. The vast majority do. Not the local banks, but the big New York Wall Street banks. It's called financial jihad. Striving for the cause of Allah with your wealth. They said it's even more important than self-sacrificing. What is self-sacrificing? Blowing yourself up as a suicide bomber. They'd rather you use your money to destroy America than blow yourself up. Now, people ask, and I'm getting ready for the first commercial, people ask me, do you think that Putin was coordinating with bin Laden? I can't believe that. I don't think that. I don't believe that. Now, we do know the KGB funded Islam, radical Islam in the Middle East. We know that, but I'm not saying that Putin was coordinating with bin Laden. I'm not suggesting that. I don't think it's any different than you put a bleeding victim in the water and the sharks all come. And I think that we've been cut and we're bleeding and the sharks are surrounding. I don't think it's humanly orchestrated. I do, however, think it's demonically orchestrated. Here's the first commercial. Saul Alinsky, in the prelude to his book, gave the dedication to Lucifer, the first radical. It's the rules for radicals. We know the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I believe that there's a demonic effort to take down the United States of America. And I believe that the demons have coordinated it. Now that's the bad news. The bad news of Luke 10 is the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. There is good news, though. Jesus said, "But I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly." Commercial number 1. There's the second one coming. Okay, at the turn of the century, the Office of Management and Budget predicted that we would have the entire federal debt paid off by the year 2010. You're laughing. You don't believe the OMB prediction? Well, of course, we're 3 years past it, and we now have $17 trillion in debt, not zero, right? Interestingly, though, the OMB said we'd have all of our budget paid off by the debt paid off by 2010, and Pandering said by the year 2010 that the U.S. would collapse from under the weight of its foreign debt. Who was right, the Russian professor or the Office of Management and Budget? So how did we get from almost paying off all of our debt to the point that our economy almost went away? I want you to listen to this. This is from Representative Paul Kanjorski, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, about what happened in 2008.
On Thursday at about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Federal Reserve noticed a tremendous drawdown of money market accounts in the United States to the tune of $550 billion was being drawn out in a matter of an hour or two. The Treasury opened up its window to help. They pumped $105 billion in the system and quickly realized that they could not stem the tide. We were having an electronic run on the banks. They decided to close the operation, close down the money accounts, and announce a guarantee of $250,000 per account so there wouldn't be further panic out there. And that's what actually happened. If they had not done that, their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours the world economy would have collapsed. Now, we talked at that time about what would happen if that happened. It would have been the end of our economic system and our political system as we know it. And that's why, when they made the point, we've got to act and do things quickly, we did.
Okay, now just imagine that. Somebody yanked out $550 billion out of the money markets, and they estimated that if this caused a panic, if I shouted fire in here now, do you think people would rush to the exits? Somebody with $500 billion was able to influence about $5.5 trillion, and that would have collapsed the system. And that's why we have TARP and bailouts and all the other things, is this incident. What caused this incident? How did we get from having everything almost paid off to being $17 trillion of debt and having our economy almost go away? 9/11. It changed everything. Because of 9/11, they hit the economic structure. Bin Laden was quoted, he said, I'll bleed America with the death of 1,000 cuts. Every time they would spend $10,000 on an operation, we'd respond with $10 million of response. You have to take your shoes off to go through the airport. Think of all of the regulations, all of the things that we do. There was a study that just came out. Did you know that 75% of our economic growth has been sapped away by regulation? It's a study that just came out. We would have a much larger, our economy would be 50 trillion in size and not 15 trillion in size if it weren't for all of the regulations. Some of those regulations came from 9/11. Some direct spending came from 9/11 too. It wasn't cheap to send all the equipment and everything that we sent over to the Middle East to fight 2 wars. This is an economic war more than it is any other kind of war. Actually, I take that back. The second commercial, I'll tell you, it's a spiritual war. But for now, we'll stick with economic war. We were on the path to paying our debt off. The OMB was right. In the latter years of the 20th century, we were running budget surpluses. And until 9/11 hit, we didn't have any deficits. And 9/11 had a serious deficit. And we clawed our way back, and we're almost break even in the year 2007. And then the financial crisis hit in 2008. And we've had trillion-dollar deficits ever since. Since the turn of the century, when the book Unrestricted Warfare was written, the Chinese economy has grown from about 6% of the world's economy to almost overtaking the U.S. We've gone from almost a quarter of the world's economy to right now almost the same size as China. And the International Monetary Fund predicts China will overtake us in the year 2016, 3 years from now. I don't know if that's the case or not. That's just the economists' predictions are about as bad as the OMB predictions. Nevertheless, they've grown a lot in the past 10 years, and we have not. There's been other winners. The Middle East, the OPEC nations, have moved trillions of dollars of money away from America. Did you know oil was $20 a barrel in the year 2000? It's almost $100 a barrel today. It's gotten as high as $150. Who's been the loser? The American middle class. We the people. We're the losers. Our standard of living has decreased, our wealth has decreased, our influence and voting rights have decreased. We've been the losers, and the OPEC nations and China have been the primary winners. So in 2008, David Barton had a conference in Arlington. There were 2 people speaking at the conference. A friend of mine was a mutual friend of theirs, and he said, one of these is a major assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon. He's an expert on Sharia, and the other one is a counterterrorism expert with the FBI. You've got to meet these guys. I didn't have a chance to go to the conference. He said, pick them up and take them to breakfast. I took them to breakfast, and they told me some frightening things. One of the things they told me was that the Muslim Brotherhood had plans to turn America into an Islamic nation. I was like, wow, that seems like that'd take a long time. People aren't going to wear burqas here. He said, no, they've got detailed plans. They're going to hit these zones, and they're going to come in, and they're going to take over. And another thing they have is they're going to remove all the friendly dictators in the Muslim nations. Like Mubarak in Egypt will be gone, and Gaddafi will be, not that he was friendly, but he was, he did give up his nuclear weapons program. Gaddafi will be gone, and they're going to slowly move out. They were right about those things. The Arab Spring, and we've seen the rise of Islam in this. Both of those things were accurate. I said, but those are slow ways to do it. You want to bring America to its knees, you need to do what the Chinese said. Unrestricted warfare. Let's do financial warfare. How would that work? I said, well, you guys are with the FBI and the Pentagon. You should know this. What do you mean, how would that work? I'm a money manager out of Texas. You asking me? And they said, no, we don't know anything about this. So I was contacted within a week or so and asked by a group in the Pentagon, will you write a research report and explain how financial warfare works? So I wrote a little white paper and sent it to them. They came back and asked for another white paper, wrote it and sent it to them. Finally, they came back in the middle of January and asked me to write a full research paper, which I did and presented to the Defense Department in June of that year. What I found was that our entire system ignores the possibility of financial warfare. Now, let me tell you this. When I presented it, I was commissioned under the Bush administration. When I presented it was under the Obama administration. I presented it. At first, they were very receptive. Then eventually they said, we think we're going to classify this and put it in your jail and talk about it. I've got the emails that will show you. It says, we have it in our power to classify this. Get it? So what my friend did is he took a copy of my research, sent it off to Jim Woolsey, who was the former director of CIA, and Jim Woolsey sent one to John Powell, Joe Lieberman, and John McCain, and they stuck it in their safe, and he said, if you classify Freeman's research, I want you to pull this out and read it on the Senate floor. And you know what? They backed off. They didn't classify it. That's why I'm able to talk to you about it today. Anyway, what I found was our government wasn't thinking in these terms at all. And sadly, I'm not sure they're thinking in these terms yet. My hypothesis, which I'm going to run through very quickly, if you had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to destroy our economy and you were an enemy, would you do it? Of course. Yep. How would you do it? Commodity manipulation, using secret weapons, naked short selling, and credit default swaps. Oil prices went from $50 to $150 a barrel in 18 months while the nation and the world was going into a recession, while demand was going down and supply was going up. How do you triple the price of oil? And there were no supply disruptions. Nobody closed the Straits of Hormuz. There were no disruptions in the Middle East. How did oil prices triple? Basically, the Middle East sovereign wealth funds took a bunch of money and invested in the oil's future markets. We trade 10 times as much oil as we actually use. Even Rex Tillerson of ExxonMobil says that maybe 40% of the price of oil is pure speculation. Even Goldman Sachs admits that every million barrels of long invested in the futures market increases the price of oil 10 cents. Basically, if a sovereign wealth fund of the Middle East wanted to bet $10 million and put 1 million barrels long in the futures market with no intention of actually taking delivery, using it, or anything, they just put $10 million in, it would increase the price of oil by 10 cents. The Middle East produces, OPEC nations produce 30 million barrels of oil a day. If you produce 30 million barrels of oil a day and you get a 10-cent bump in the price, you get an extra $3 million back. In other words, based on this analysis, you could invest $10 million, and if you were an oil producer, you'd get $3 million a day back. That's a pretty good investment, don't you think? That's what part of what happened. Part of it was a panic, part of it was a whole lot of other things. But when you've got oil producers buying long in the futures market and moving prices higher. Now, some people disagree with me on this. Goldman Sachs used to, and ExxonMobil was silent. But since my research has come out, I've talked to several of these people. Dan Dicker, who wrote the book Oil's Endless Bid, go buy that book, read that, and it'll tell you that people playing in the futures markets are driving